This is the sad true story of Lieutenant Frederick Kislingbury, as told at the Seneca Park Zoo's After Dark, October 2021. I know something worse than being eaten by a polar bear. Let me tell you the sad true story of Lieutenant Frederick Kislingbury. In 1881, a group of men set out on an expedition to try to reach the North Pole. They were led by Lieutenant Adolphus Greely, and his second in command was Rochester's Lieutenant Frederick Kislingbury. The men set up base camp at Lady Franklin Bay with everything they thought they would need for the first 2 years of what was to be a 3-year expedition. But owing to Greely's inexperience, bad temper, and the failure of supply ships to arrive as scheduled, at the end of those 2 years, the men found themselves in increasingly dire circumstances. Greely made the decision to relocate to a second base camp farther south, where he hoped supply ships had been able to rendezvous. The men made a treacherous month-long journey, and when they arrived, they found 60 days' worth of supplies. 24 men, 60 days' worth of supplies. You do the math. One by one, the men began to die of starvation. One man was shot for stealing bits of food, and things got really bad after that. Almost a year later, help finally arrived, and rescuers found 6 emaciated men huddled together, chewing on bits of shoe leather. Our Lieutenant Kislingbury was not among them. The barely living and the bodies of the dead were returned to their hometowns, and when Lieutenant Kislingbury's casket arrived in Rochester, it was sealed shut with 52 bolts, and it came with strict instructions from the Army that it was not to be opened under any circumstances, and must be interred immediately. 20,000 mourners gathered on the steps of the Monroe County Courthouse to pay their respects, and then Lieutenant Kislingbury was laid to rest in Mount Hope Cemetery. But questions still arose. How do 60 days' worth of supplies last almost a year and produce even one survivor, let alone 6? Well, that's when rumors of cannibalism began to circulate, and some wondered if there were even any remains at all in Kislingbury's casket. The Rochester Post newspaper offered to pay for an exhumation, and 4 days after Lieutenant Kislingbury was buried, they dug him up. Oh, he was in the casket. What was left of him, anyway. 50 pounds of remains wrapped in a wool blanket. There was no skin at all on the body and very little flesh from the neck down. In fact, the 2 doctors who examined the corpse determined that it had been methodically carved away. Yes, Lieutenant Kislingbury died in the Arctic, but he was not eaten by a polar bear, no. He was devoured by his fellow man.